Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us. Welcome to the fall edition of our series, Insight to Action. My name is Nora Anderson, and I'm the Executive Director of Executive Education at the Carlson School of Management. The Carlson School is delighted to bring this virtual series to you, featuring thought leadership and insights of our faculty and industry experts. The goal of the series is to translate business research into practical knowledge for business leaders. The series is a partnership between the Carlson School's Office of Alumni Relations and our Executive Education Unit, and we're excited to welcome several hundred alumni and friends in attendance today. Our event today will focus on leading successful hybrid teams, and we are joined by Carlson Professor Connie Wanberg and Florie Ellwein, Chief Human Resources Officer of Jostens. If you have questions throughout the session today, please use the Q&A function in Zoom to post your questions, and we will address as many as possible towards the end of the session. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. Connie Wanberg is a professor and industrial relations faculty excellence chair in the Work and Organizations Department at the Carlson School. In her role as educator, she teaches classes involving human resources management, leadership, industrial organizational psychology, and organizational behavior. In her role as researcher, she's internationally known for her work on unemployment, job search, and careers. Professor Wanberg has held many leadership roles at the Carlson School, including chair of the HRIR department and associate dean of the undergraduate program. We are also delighted to welcome industry expert Florie Ellwein. Florie is Chief Human Resources Officer at Jostens, a consumer goods company that creates experiences and memorabilia that celebrate achievement. She has been with Jostens for 2 years, leading and growing the HR organization. Most recently, Florie led the organization through the COVID-19 pandemic, while also driving employee engagement, improvement, and improving talent management in the organization. She has also held senior leadership roles at US Bank, Best Buy, Target, Ecolab, and the Carlson companies. And finally, last but not least, she is a proud Carlson alum. She completed the full-time MBA program at the Carlson School of Management. Thank you, Connie and Florie, for joining us. And Connie, I will turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. So it's just really wonderful to connect with you, and I hope you're having a great fall season. Today, what we're going to do is Florie and I are going to trade off back and forth and talk about emerging forms of hybrid work in the Twin Cities and across the United States. We're going to be talking about what surveys say about employee and executive preferences. We're going to be talking about some looming concerns that organizations have and some best practice suggestions. And we're going to have time to benchmark with all of you and do some Q&A. So let's start with emerging forms of hybrid work. And just so that we're on the same page, let me say that there's really two forms or elements of hybrid work. And that is, to what extent is work in your organization placed unconstrained, or certain jobs placed unconstrained? And to what extent are they time unconstrained? And really, since COVID, we've seen across the entire world that more and more jobs are becoming more place unconstrained and time unconstrained. So let me give you a few examples coming from alumni organizations and friends of Carlson organizations across the world. So one major trend is that some workers have a remote option and some do not. And organizations are being much more careful to develop policies so that they ensure that there are clear delineations of what types of job roles or what positions are allowed to have the remote option, so that there's equity within everybody in those job classifications. And if you're a member of Society for Human Resource Management, there's some form templates on that website. Another major issue that's happening is, if you have remote work, what's happening is a lot of organizations are specifying 3 days in, 2 days remote, 2 days in, three days remote, and some have no specification of how many days are in and out. For those organizations that have a certain number of days in and out, there's some confusion about who's in when and who's not in. And so some workers are now moving to have in their signature what days they're in and out on their email. And some are even on Google Calendar blocking their days publicly to say, here are the days I'm in or out. Another major trend is that more workers are taking flexibility in location across time zones, and that's producing some controversy over whether or not the organization should change pay levels to be more consistent with either a more expensive or cheaper location. And it's producing some difficulties with scheduling meetings, just more increase in difficulties. Really quick, let me give you an example of Room and Board headquarters. It's a furniture store here in the Twin Cities. What they did is they had a return to work July 3rd. The headquarters staff, this is not the store staff, the headquarters staff had the choice to return as hybrid, and that was defined as 2 to 3 days in the office. A few staff members were approved to work remotely out of state. But then post-Delta, they went back and are currently more in a flexible policy where even some workers don't have to come in 2 to 3 days in the office. Real quickly, before I turn it over to Florie to add a few comments, there have been surveys that have noted what's happening with employee preferences. And many employees, as you probably know, have really thought about their preferences for remote work since the pandemic started. And more workers are preferring remote or hybrid work. And so you can see post-pandemic, if you look at the red bar, this is the preference for hybrid work, and it's gone way up among employees. It does depend on employee personality. There's some workers that are just not cut out to work at home all the time and really miss the connection of the office. And so as an example with Room and Board headquarters, there are several workers who still go in every day. It also depends on employee experience. And I'll just tell you as an educator, I do particularly hear from my newly graduated students that as they're new hires, it's really hard to just work remote and not be able to develop relationships with others. There is a trend in these surveys towards Gen Z, individuals who were born in 1997 or younger, that there's more of a preference to work in the office and to develop more relationships in the office. So those are a few comments from me. And as I said, we're going to go back and forth. So Florie, would you like to maybe talk a little bit about what's going on at Jostens?
Sure. Thank you, Connie. At Jostens, we frankly had a lot of difficult conversations with senior leadership and the desire and push to be coming back into our workforce 5 days a week, full time. And there was a sense of working from home is behind us. The pandemic is transitioning. We should be back to where we used to be. However, that isn't really the reality with where our employees are feeling and what they're wanting to do. It just simply wasn't the case anymore. Work styles have changed, people's preferences have changed, and frankly, offering employees the option and the choices has become one of the largest drivers as a benefit and as a attraction tool to our company. The argument that ended up working was the war for talent from mid-sized companies locally in the Twin Cities. Jostens, along with many other firms that are our size, we might not have the name brand to pull people, so we needed to be creative in how we offer employees a choice and other benefits of our culture to draw people to come join us and work with us. So for us, if we're moving to the next slide of where we adopted on forms of hybrid work, we ended up adopting a 3-day in the office, 2 days at home policy. We did transition to a hybrid model early July. And every team actually adopted a different form or variance of which 3 days they were going to be in the office. For example, our finance team asks that employees come in on Monday and Tuesdays to pull numbers for weekly forecasting and business-specific KPIs and metrics. The other third day, employees are allowed to choose when they come in. In marketing, they have opted to have a standard day that they come in for team meetings and then are able to flex on the other days that they join. Personally, in HR, I've only asked my team to be on site on Wednesdays because that is the day that we have our senior leadership meeting, and so that I'm able to come out of that meeting and then share strategic insights and where company is going, and we can brainstorm on how to support our employees coming right out of that. Ultimately, it really is about leaders trusting their employees to get work done. Personally, I care about results and delivering excellence, but I really don't care personally when my HR team comes into the office or leaves. As a leader, I feel that I'm responsible for growing people's careers and not watching a clock. If we move to the next slide, one of the challenges that we're facing recently has been when our county here at Jostens identified this county as a highly transmissible COVID-19 area, we opted to follow guidance by the city and are requiring mask wearing at all times in the corporate office. What became evident early on was that those that had a closed door office were able to have more mask breaks than those that sat in cubes. And the question that kept coming into my office or to my HR team member's office was, can I work from home until the mask mandate is lifted? Can I transition from a hybrid policy to fully remote until the mask mandate is lifted? And we had to take a tough stance, and we opted to say that the answer was no. We didn't want to go backwards and shift to fully remote. And we still had the desire to have those in-person interactions with senior leadership. We felt that was really important. We tried to help managers work through scheduling to ensure people were able to spread out if they were in close cubes, or stagger scheduling, and even offer flexibility to work in break rooms or empty conference rooms. While it isn't ideal, and we recognize that, we did want to keep the momentum forward, but still be sensitive to those equity questions that were coming into HR.
Thank you, Florie. So let's talk more broadly about other emerging concerns and then move into some best practices. I'd like to ask all of you online to consider first, to what extent has hybrid work had some positive consequences for you, your work team, or the larger organization? And to what extent has hybrid work had some negative consequences for you, your work team, and the larger organization? Oftentimes, by reflecting upon these questions, you can think about some solutions or things that you want to amplify or change. And as we go on, we want to start beginning some benchmarking. And so what we're going to do is share in the chat a link where you can actually share with others what is your biggest current challenge in leading or working on a hybrid team, and what is something that is working well or a best practice you can share. And so I'd really love for everyone to weigh in on this Google Doc that has been, the link has been shared in chat. And please provide as much detail as possible so we can really understand your challenge or your best practice. And also feel free to comment on each other's responses. And organizers among you, feel free to also organize the responses and format in any way. And hopefully this will become a nice benchmarking document. And I'll go on while you're working and multitasking to talk a little bit about some emerging concerns that we've heard from alumni organizations, Friends of Carlson, and organizations across the world. So one big concern is, how is remote work going to change our organizational culture? And how can we retain the best parts of our organizational culture? Another thing that is happening is organizations are realizing they really need to be careful about equity issues. And so when opportunities are offered, you need to make sure that you're really considering that offering for all individuals who fit into that same classification, level of work experience, job role, etc. Organizations are really worried about how this is affecting creativity and inspiration within their organizations. As an example, I have a friend who works at an organization and she manages projects. And projects stem from innovation or ideas that have come from members. And she said that the number of projects has gone way down, and it's really because people aren't having a chance to chat informally. Organizations are worried about keeping their employees engaged, and they're also worried about communication and maintaining good communication. Let me talk a little bit about communication as an example. So hybrid work is reducing our ability to clarify or touch base on smaller, less urgent, but still important questions. Like sometimes I just have just this little thing that I might want to clarify, and it's just kind of complicated by email. It becomes a bigger issue by email. And it's just nice when you touch base informally or run into the person in the hallway. We're over relying on emails, and also hybrid work is producing some contact with the immediate team, but maybe not with others in the organization. As a few best practice suggestions, some organizations are, as we've mentioned, trying to coordinate in-person work times to make sure that teams are in on the same day. Some organizations are making sure they do big picture check-ins at least once a month, really asking their team what is going well and what can be improved. So just taking 10 minutes to kind of chat about this. And one tip I would give is don't just allow the most vocal person on your team. You might want to go round robin and really ask everyone on your team, what is one thing you think is going well and what can be improved? Because then that allows the person who maybe never speaks up without being asked to also weigh in. I also think it's helpful to consider more immediate communication modes. It's becoming more common for people to actually share their cell phone numbers for a quick call. Like, can you take a quick phone call? I don't know about your workplace, but in ours, it hasn't been as common to actually call people on their cell phone, and that's becoming more common. Best practices also include having meetings or walks or activities in person and connecting remote workers with on-site employees on virtual chats. As a few other quick tips before I turn it over to Florie again, I'll just say, one suggestion is also to thank your workers for their work, but not just to rely on global emails or videos to the group as a whole. Really try to thank individuals and thank them specifically. Don't just say thank you for all your work. Maybe say, you know what, thank you for stepping up on XYZ project. So thank that individual rather than a global email that says, it's been really hard. Thank you to everyone in the organization for their hard work. Also, again, I've said this several times, but really make sure you have a remote work policy so that you're equitable, so that everybody's offered in the same job classification or job characteristics, the same possibilities. I will note that across our friends of Carlson, stress seems to be a big issue. It seems that teams are taking on more and more. I don't know what's going on, but just consider what you as a team might be able to stop doing rather continuing to add more work. And last, I'll say that more organizations are including in their training of new supervisors tips and practices for working remotely with their teams. So, Florie, I'll turn it over to you to add some thoughts about what's going on at Jostens.
Thanks, Connie. I think right now, as many of us HR professionals are putting our heads together, we are struggling, to be honest, with the recent Biden administration guidance and Department of Labor's OSHA requiring all employers with at least 100 employees to make sure that their workforce is fully vaccinated or require unvaccinated workers to have a negative test weekly. We know that there could be penalties with violation to doing this. And earlier this summer, in anticipation of where the trends were going, we asked for voluntary uploads of vaccine cards, not mandating it into our HRIS protected medical records file. We were hoping to see where we were as an organization with vaccine uploads. And we are averaging about 30% vaccinated uploads in the South, where we have many of our manufacturing plants. This is very concerning because while we don't want to create a political divide amongst our workforce, we will soon be legally obligated to comply with this policy. This, of course, raises a lot of questions for my team of, do we provide weekly on-site testing? Or do we swing the pendulum the other way and do what Delta has done by creating a monthly surcharge for those that are choosing to be unvaccinated? In recent articles, you can see that Delta did see a spike in those that became vaccinated after announcing the surcharge. Additionally, from an administrative perspective, we have many manufacturing plants across the country and in other countries as well. Who is going to be responsible for checking for negative COVID testing or making sure that our employees are vaccinated when we have upwards of 400 to 700 people coming in at different shifts? Certainly, this responsibility can't just sit on HR's shoulders. And how do we manage that as we're looking at shift labor? Transparently, I'll be very honest, we don't know what we're doing yet. These are just discussions that my team is having, certainly in partnership with our operations department and our legal teams. I don't know if anyone has a great answer to this, but transparently, this is something that we're really worried about. We don't see a high likelihood of higher vaccination rates in our manufacturing plants in the South. So we have to come together to figure out how to administer this and how to process these changes. If we move to the next slide on best practices for engagement. Engagement was difficult for many of us during the pandemic, and certainly it was a readjustment of our office reopening. I'm not sure if I necessarily have best practices, but I'm happy to share what we did at Jostens. During the pandemic and when we were mostly remote, we did launch a CEO video that was released once a month to all employees to provide an update and a little bit of grounding on what are our strategies, where are we at as a company in terms of financials. This was in addition to a quarterly senior leadership town hall. And this medium was received honestly with mixed reviews. Some loved it and some felt that it was still impersonal. We tried summer gatherings and outdoor spaces to be safe and have a sense of community. These events were actually very well received. We had food trucks, we had barbecues, we had chili cook-offs in all of our different plant locations. And bringing people together in the summer did create a nice sense of community before our busy season kicks off. I recently read a McKinsey article entitled Great Attrition or Great Attraction. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. One of the difficulties that many of us are facing with the job market opening up is employers are struggling with engagement and retention. The article was a great reminder that typically the channels that we've used to retain talent, such as retention bonuses and spot note bonuses, may not be what employees are craving right now. I think sometimes the easy solution is let's throw money at employees to make sure that they stay. But really, the article brought focus to needing to focus on culture improvements that are tangible and feel long-lasting to employees. For example, not being sheltered under toxic leaders, ensuring that we have the right people in the right jobs, focusing on simple gratitude and ensuring that the environment is not just transactional. Thanking employees, showing daily gratitude will create that sense of engagement. So as a team, we've really been focusing on that, sharing that message with senior leadership, and focusing even more so than we have in the past on talent reviews and making sure that issues are addressed and that we're training all of our managers on how to have difficult conversations and action when employees are not performing. We don't have the luxury of having a toxic work culture, especially when we're remote, especially when we're in a hybrid situation. We need to be coming together as an organization and driving that positive momentum.
Thank you. And so I see that there's a lot of comments on our discussion board, and I hope you are taking the opportunity to kind of read through all of these ideas and suggestions on the board. There's a lot of challenges mentioned here. One person is saying that days have really gotten longer for them. Pre-pandemic, there was an attempt to try to have global calls during the US workday, but that wasn't as ideal for the global teams. And now it's really good that they're trying to accommodate the global work hours better, but that means really long days for this organization. There are several other challenges mentioned about communication, innovation, worries about culture, a lot of echoing of the challenges that I mentioned. In terms of best practices, if you scroll all the way down in the document, people are mentioning a lot of really positives about global work and hybrid work and some best practices. And I see that one of you noted that you are starting to contact each other by personal cell phones. Others are saying that they're spending the first 30 minutes of their weekly team meeting talking about personal things. I think that's really worked well for us. It gets a little old if we do it at every meeting, but we've done a little bit more of taking 15 minutes of casual catch up now and then. There's a comment about surveying employees about what their preference is and working with a senior leader to see what concerns they may or may not be. I think it's good to just actually ask what's on employees' minds. It makes people feel that you're interested and that they have a voice. And it just keeps you in contact with what they're thinking. I really do recommend that you take time for a big picture check-in now and then. Florie, do you see anything you want to pull out from the best practice suggestions or anything else from the Google Doc?
Yeah, there were a couple of comments as I was scrolling that struck me. One, somebody from Delta spoke up. Thank you for sharing your insights. We have been watching certainly your best practices and requiring the vaccine mandate or the vaccine surcharge, I apologize. And it is definitely something that we're considering. We also have unfortunately lost a few employee lives due to COVID. So it is becoming ever more concerning for us to make sure that our workforce is safe and that people feel safe coming into work. In terms of best practices, one comment in here that struck me too was making sure that teams feel connected and just hallway conversations. That has been an overwhelmingly positive comment that I have heard is when people are on site, there is a lot more popping your head into someone's office, chatting in the hallway that normally otherwise would have just been another email in the massive list of daily emails that we get. So it has been great when we have had some unity to hybrid work schedules where people are all congregated on a team on a specific day. Certainly training was another issue that I saw in the comments, and especially new hires. So how do you engage new hires and how do you onboard them into an organization when they haven't really felt a sense of culture yet? We have done a great job of rethinking our onboarding and our new hire training. We're doing a lot more one-on-ones, in-persons, and even suggesting that managers try to coordinate with others on the team to have either a lunch or a walk, or creating those personal relationships before the new hire goes into this hybrid work mode. It's really important that they get a good base understanding of our culture before retreating back to their home office. And that has been something that we've had to really rethink of how we do new hire onboarding. So that has certainly been a focus of ours as well.
Great. And I also see a comment about how it's really difficult to have mentoring of new employees. And I want to echo my comment from before. Of course, I'm an educator at the University of Minnesota, and many of you were our alum and graduates. And these new students are graduating, and many of them are working from remotely from the very start. And what we're increasingly trying to do, and I encourage you to do with any new employees, not just brand new hires out of school, but we're trying to urge them to be proactive in reaching out to others and not just to expect others to reach out to them. So we're trying to communicate that when you go into a new organization, think about who your stakeholders are, who are the major people within your team or beyond your team that you should get to know. And make sure to try to develop a relationship with those people proactively. You know, maybe ask them for a 15-minute catch up, or, just, say, can you stay on a few minutes after a meeting? Or when you're in person in the office, intentionally stop by to say hello to that person. So I think that we are really encouraging new hires to be proactive rather than just putting all the responsibility on the organization. And I think that you can really reinforce that message. You have to do it over and over to really say, please reach out to others to get to know others in the organization. And most of the time, others are very receptive to that. Florie, before we move on, do you have any others that you want to pull out to comment on?
A few of you made similar comments about not every executive leader has the same philosophy, and some are still stuck in their very traditional ways, or maybe you have an extrovert leader that really is desiring more of that in person. And how do you handle those different opinions? And I think this is a great question, because this is a reality that many of us are facing in HR. And as I mentioned on an earlier slide, we struggled with that at Jostens. Many of our senior leaders wanted to come back full time. And what we really try to focus on is data, right? What are other companies doing? What are benchmarking? We were able to prove that most companies are not coming back 5 days a week full time. So we had to kind of present the business case, if you will, before making that decision and getting leaders to embrace that. Additionally, we have had some leaders push the 3 days into kind of four days or 4.5 days. And we as HR have had to have those difficult conversations with those leaders of, let's make sure that we're sticking to the policy. Let's make sure that we're giving employees flexibility of when and how they work, sticking to our 3 days in, 2 days remote. And they're not always received well. And truthfully, some employees are struggling with managers that are having a difficult time onboarding. But I will tell you that shows up in their engagement survey scores. So we have done a quarterly engagement survey, and we have been able to piece together the data that shows those leaders that are flexible, that are allowing their employees the trust to choose when they come in within the guidance of 3 days, are having higher engagement amongst their employees. So sometimes the data has to speak for itself to get those leaders on board.
Great. Well, I think now we can move to some Q&A, and I see some Q&A showing up. One question, so I'll take a couple of these, Florie, and you can click the Q&A to see the Q&As coming in. One of the questions is about potential lawsuits. And I think that one issue that organizations have faced is whether or not they can require vaccinations, as an example. And really, the protected groups for requirements such as that are religious or disability. And so typically those are the protected groups that you would need to allow an exception for. So it's any protected group by law. There's a question about whether or not we've heard any early learnings on the pros and cons of having an office space. And are there any learnings that 100% remote is not sustainable? So really, this is a very, very new issue. And I think that it's really dependent on the people that you have within your organization and how they operate the remote team and the type of work that you're engaging in. 100% remote is definitely sustainable for some work groups and some situations. I will say that, and this ties to another question that's being asked, some offices are downsizing office space. And the state of Minnesota, as an example, now has a certain number of cubicles, and people just share whatever cubicles as they come in. And this is a big adaptation for workers. And I think we're really going to see how it evolves. And my thinking is that employees, to a great extent, are going to become better in this new environment, and we're going to learn how to be better in a hybrid environment. But we are going to face new challenges and have to adapt to these. Florie, do you have anything you want to add to these Q&A thoughts?
Yeah, so one question that was asked in the Q&A was, post-pandemic, is Jostens or other companies reducing office space? I will tell you that we have reduced our office space for our call center teams. We have found that our call center teams have been able to be extremely effective, 100% remote. Also, we are finding it to be actually better business because our call center agents are able to take calls at home, and many of them are located in Minnesota. So for those of us that live with snowstorms and potential road closures or school closures, they have found it to be really, really helpful. And we've actually been able to attract and retain in that component of our workforce to be fully remote. So where our customer service center used to occupy office space, we are able to reduce. We have not done that at the corporate office because we are using the extra space, if you will, and open offices for people to stagger. So in the situations where we do have cubes and people work very closely together, many times they're able to move or bring their laptop to open conference rooms because our conference rooms are not being used as much as they were in the past. So we have not reduced in corporate, but have reduced in some other areas such as call centers.
Great. And there is a question about what religions would not prescribe vaccines. And there are actually very few religions that are anti-vaccination, but there are some. And you can really Google to get some information on which exact religions. It is a minority of religions. And then the question was also like, can't anyone claim to be that religion? And that is a real difficulty for organizations. And it's a reason that some organizations have been tempted to not go to vaccination requirements. The University of Minnesota has a vaccination requirement, but actually we were all just asked to testify that we required. We didn't have to actually show evidence of vaccination. So typically organizations will look for, true intent that the person really is from that religious background. And then you can provide accommodations to individuals if they say they cannot be vaccinated. And if if it truly affects your business practices in a negative way, such as if you're in a prison or if you have nurses and you need everybody vaccinated and somebody claims they're from a certain religion and you cannot accommodate them, then the law would actually allow you to say that they can't continue in the organization. But in these practices, it's always good to have legal advice.
Connie,
Yes.
Connie, another question that came in was, what strategies has Jostens put in place to maintain positive relationships between those that can work remotely and those who cannot? This has come up a lot in our organization. Certainly the perception that if you are able to work remote 100% of the time, you are getting an added benefit that others are not able to receive. So you have to remember that Jostens is a manufacturing company. We have multiple plants. We are geographically distributed. We have locations in Mexico, Dominican Republic, and Canada. And certainly when the pandemic hit and all corporate employees or desk jobs were working remote, everyone in our factory locations was working full time during the pandemic because we were delivering yearbooks and caps and gowns. So graduation still happened, yearbooks still went out, and it was our responsibility to our customers to make sure that they had that experience. We definitely got a lot of pushback and feedback that it's not fair. We try to overemphasize in those situations gratitude, and certainly with our factory locations, we had to adjust labor and hourly labor rates to make it an incentive to stay and to work during the pandemic. And since then, we still have had to have more of an eye and focus on engagement and gratitude in our plant locations, because we do hear it all the time that corporate employees are able to work from home part-time, and in a plant manufacturing environment, you're not able to, or even let's say our call center is able to work full-time. We do talk a lot about job roles, and some roles are able to be remote and the nature of a certain role is not. We need to produce yearbooks, and you unfortunately cannot do that from your home office, but you can take calls from your home office. So we do try to focus on facts, but it certainly does not diminish people's feelings. And what I tell leaders is you have to decipher between sharing facts and grounding people in data, but also being sensitive and empathetic to how people are feeling. And sometimes those feelings can be worked through by ensuring that people feel appreciated, valued, and that their work matters to the organization.
So we have a question from Christine saying, how are companies handling employees who want to relocate? Are they adjusting pay to fit the local labor market? So this is a really controversial, timely, and sensitive topic right now. And the debate began when Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg said that he was going to adjust employee pay when they were moving to a location where the cost of living was lower. So he was actually going to adjust pay down. And the logic for that is if your employees are typically in a location where the cost of living is higher and they move to a location where the cost of living is lower, that it increases equity if you're making the compensation fit your policy, which is, consistent with the cost of living. But it's produced all kinds of discussion, and employers are having to make decisions about this. And one debate is, okay, should we increase pay if people move to a more expensive location? I do know that a couple of companies here in the Twin Cities have decided to keep pay rates the same and to keep those remote geographical moves temporary, so to keep the approvals temporary. Florie, do you have anything to add to that, or any other thing you wanted? take off on?
Yeah, certainly in our manufacturing facilities, the cost of living as well as the pay rate is determined by that location and that location only. However, where we have run into this is, let's say, a corporate employee who accepts a job, but then through negotiation or through some special arrangement with the leader, opts to be a remote and just travel into the Twin Cities, for example, for their executive level job. We do not adjust the compensation for that executive. The compensation is based on it being an executive job in the Twin Cities. So if that executive happens to live in San Francisco, their job is based in the Twin Cities primarily, whether they're choosing to commute or not. We do not adjust the pay rate for that.
Great. See, we had, just lost it. Josh asks, how do companies maintain the culture when they're mostly in the office? And also asks, like, how are companies making sure that innovation is generated and maintained in hybrid environments? So let me talk about the innovation piece. This is a really big concern. So people are getting their work done, but that innovation piece is something that we may need to make some time for. And this might be just having some more casual meetings where you kick around ideas, that it's not just like we're going to move through an agenda. Let's just take some time to brainstorm, maybe use the chat, maybe use the Google Doc like we did today, so that, again, you're getting ideas from people who are less vocal. We had some comments before that's one real advantage of the hybrid work environment, where maybe your less vocal employees have been speaking up more. That's not been my experience. My experience has been actually that when we meet, I think it's really important to call on people to say, so-and-so, what do you think? Because not everybody's been speaking up. But so for the innovation piece, really take some time to schedule get-togethers to say, let's talk about new ideas, and then follow up the conversation, because those ideas take some time to germinate. People can't just think of them on the spot. So maybe pose a few big questions and then say, let's get together to chat. Okay, before we move on, Florie, do you have others that you would like to pick on?
Somebody asked, just to the panelists, what other local companies are doing in terms of hybrid or returning to work. And I would say a unofficial survey, but just kind of through my own network of working with Minneapolis CHROs, many are wanting to move to hybrid, but many have delayed. So initial plans were to bring back people into the office in some form of wave structure by job type in the fall, and many have delayed because of the Delta variant that has been increasing lately, as well as waiting to bring people back because many that have children that are under 12 are not yet vaccinated. So that has posed certainly a risk. We have tried to take those situations with our own employees on a case-by-case basis. Generally, our policy is 3 days in, 2 days at home, but certainly we've had people come to us to say, I have a child that's asthmatic, I have somebody that's not vaccinated at home, and we will always make accommodations for that. But to answer the question of what are other Minneapolis companies doing, I have not heard of anyone that's coming back full-time 5 days a week, unless it's a private small employer. Most of the large companies here in the Twin Cities are moving to hybrid, but have delayed that return to work until January even.
Great. And okay, the last one I'll just take on is Mike is asking, in this time of COVID and high stress at home and at work, has anyone found a way to lower stress? I have heard that many organizations are paying more attention to stress. I I think what I've heard from workers is that some of the methods aren't very useful. Like there have been more emails about like, here's our employee assistance program, or here's a session on well-being and mindfulness. But at the end of the day, it just seems the pace of work and the amount of screen time for certain employees, and then for people in the office, maybe in manufacturing roles, there's been other stressors that have gone on for some time. And I think that just across time, we all just have to keep being listening and just asking people how they're doing, and maintaining that fine line between expecting work productivity, but not contributing to the rat race. I feel like there's been an acceleration of work across organizations, and we're expecting more and more of our workers. Feel free to also answer some of the questions in the chat to give other suggestions to people who have answered or asked these questions. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is to take a moment to decide on one action item, thinking about the things that we discussed today. Maybe there's just one small piece, maybe there's multiple pieces, but maybe there's just one small thing you can do to implement in your work team if you're a supervisor, or if you're on a work team as a participant, maybe you can suggest to your team. Maybe it's something that you can just proactively plan. I have often, just to keep in touch with my work team, I've scheduled bike rides or walks, and just said, like, hey, should we get together and just take an hour walk? And we'll meet somewhere in the Twin Cities to just walk without any great agenda. I've just found it important to keep in touch with people that way, and especially more junior people in my organization, which is the U. I kind of think it's my role to be a mentor to some people and just kind of say, let's get together and see what's on your mind. And I find great value in that as well. So take a minute to really think about one thing that you'll do within either today or within the next week. It might be to, if you're a junior member of an organization, you might actually proactively reach out to schedule a quick touch base, either in person or on Zoom with another person. Or if you're a leader, maybe you decide one or two people to thank for their work. But again, be specific about what you're thanking them for, and thank them about something that they actually did, rather than just saying thank you for all your work. Florie, would you like to add anything to that?
Connie, those are all great suggestions and things that we've encouraged our managers to do. We've also, certainly when it's been warmer in Minnesota, we've encouraged our managers to do smaller events on a more personal level. So while we did have location specific summer engagement picnics and things like that, I think there's something to be said about just a smaller group gathering. It's something that's more intimate, where people are able to socially connect. Those have been really important and valuable to our organization. And sometimes just simple things like bringing lunch back for people that are on site, taking a new employee out to lunch. Just small gestures sometimes speak much greater than a generic email, as you mentioned. Employees certainly appreciate that. We have also really focused on recognition in our quarterly meetings. And instead of focusing on kind of a generic, thank you, Connie, for everything that you've done, we have linked our recognition to our core competencies. So really recognizing people for specific contributions related to our 6 core competencies has been very well received.
Great. Okay, so feel free to send me any questions if you have after, and the Google Doc will continue to be open to you if you want to read through the answers in more detail. So I just want to take this chance to say we have a long list of resources if you want to take a picture with your cell phone. Otherwise, I think that we are going to be sending them out in a follow-up email. And you're welcome to contact me at wanbe001@umn.edu if you have any other questions. And I just want to say thank you for being loyal alum and friends of Carlson. I hope there's former students on here. I wish you luck with your hybrid work, and just be proactive to make sure you're getting what you need out of your job and work role. So thank you, and that concludes our session for today.
Thank you, Connie.
Thank you very much to both Connie and Florie for all of your insight. We will indeed be sharing that those references, those links that Connie just had on the screen. We will share that with all of you. Florie, Connie, we can't thank you enough. Thank you to everyone for joining this engaging session. We welcome your feedback. We look forward to welcoming you back in October and November for our future sessions. And we hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you very much.